One reason people are afraid to move overseas is they're afraid for their safety. Today, we're going to talk about the world's most dangerous cities, and you're going to be shocked just how concentrated they are in one part of the world. And so what that means is, if you want to follow the statistics, you can simply avoid a very small number of countries and go and live anywhere else and have a safer life than even living in a country like the United States. So let's look at two different reports. The first is the most recent year's rankings of homicides in cities around the world. Mexico takes 9 of the top 10 spots. The US takes the 10th spot. We'll go through those in a minute. Now, here's what I've said. I've spent time in Mexico. I have a home in Colombia, which also makes appearances lower on the top 50. And I felt perfectly safe there. So my theory is, if you live in a beautiful suburb where you live now, there's probably a beautiful suburban equivalent in the place where you want to go. There's a way that you can be safe. And the statistics for the entire city may not impact you. But if we want to go by the stats, the most dangerous cities in the world are Colima, Zamora, Ciudad Obregón, Zacatecas, Tijuana on the US border. Can't mean anything for San Diego, can it? Celaya. Then New Orleans in the United States, Ciudad Juarez also on the US border, and Acapulco. Most of those are not the big cities. What was actually interesting on here is the biggest cities, the ones that I often spend time in, either weren't on the list or were much lower on the list. And so Mexico City, for example, is not in the top 50 dangerous cities, but you got many of these smaller cities. I've never spoken to any of our clients or anyone else who says, I can't wait to move to Mexico. I got my residence permit ready. I'm moving to Tijuana. Now, people have talked about investment opportunities. You've got the airport there that's doing some interesting things, but these are probably not the places that you'd want to move. Those are the top 10 most dangerous cities, with New Orleans coming in at 70.5 murders per 100,000 population. Let's go through the rest of the statistics. 7 of the top 50 are in the United States. That's up from 3 in 2019, a few years ago. So that's New Orleans, that's Baltimore, Detroit, where they say there's a rebound being made. I keep hearing stories about Detroit's resurgence. They're 23rd in murders in the world. By the way, case in point, where I lived in Cleveland, not a single murder, not a single, probably anything bad happening where I graduated from high school. And so the difference, of course, is your taxes in Ohio are high, your taxes in the United States are high, cost of living is high, everything's going worse and worse every year. But yeah, of course, you can live in Cleveland, Ohio, and you can have a safe life. I do think you'll see more civil unrest in the years to come. You've seen even Canada's own RCMP, the law enforcement agency, say there's going to be more civil unrest in the next 5 years. So, how far do you have to live out before the crime comes to you? That's the interesting question. But obviously, you can live anywhere. For me, the totality of being a nomad capitalist is you keep more of your own money from taxes, you have a better lifestyle, you live in a place where there's maybe not so better social unrest, better to run a business, and potentially safer. And so what we can pretty easily break this down to is 46 of the 50 most dangerous cities for homicide rates are in the Americas. So in 2022, Mexico has 17. Again, maybe not the places where you would live in Mexico. I don't think Cabo is on here. Mexico City, which I like, is not on here. Brazil has 10. The US has 7. Colombia has 6. I'll come back to that in a minute. South Africa has 4. That's the only place that's not in the Americas that's in the numbers at all. Honduras has 2. Tegucigalpa was called the murder capital of the world. It's no longer that. Jamaica also has 1. Haiti, obviously, been in the news lately. Ecuador has 1. They've been somewhat in the news. Guatemala and El Salvador used to have 1. They're now out of the news. Here's the one they didn't count in the United States, which is a U.S. territory. A lot of Americans move there for lower taxes, and that is Puerto Rico, where San Juan scored as number 41. What I've always told Americans is if you want to legally lower your taxes, why not go to a place where the crime rates are much lower? You probably will adapt better to the culture of Dublin, Ireland, or even Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, than you would to San Juan, where the murder rate is the 41st worst in the world. And so what we help our clients do when they want to move somewhere else is consider all these factors. I'm not quite as obsessed with the crime statistics as some folks, because I do believe if you plan your life correctly, if you live a normal way, if you live in the right part of town, you're going to reduce most of the risk. But if that's a big factor for you, if you've got a family with kids and that's really important, we'll help you figure that out. I think too many people, when they want to move overseas to lower their taxes or have a better life, they follow the herd. For some Americans, that is to Puerto Rico. For some folks, it's to Dubai. If you go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply, you can learn how we help people move to dozens of countries all around the world. And so if you're looking for a place to improve your life, save more money, get a second passport, protect your assets, we can help you do that. So the bottom line is you've got a very small number of countries where these murders are so prominent. And again, I have a home in Colombia. The 6 cities that are on this list, mine is not on there. So Cali, where Jeremy, our event organizer, lives, that's at 32. I went to Jeremy's house for American Thanksgiving a couple years ago, and he lived about 45 minutes outside of town. Now I hear he lives like an hour and a half outside of town in a beautiful home. Sure, can you live in Cali? Just like in Cleveland, you can live in one of these places and you can be safe. But Cali is number 32. Santa Marta, Colombia, Buenaventura, Cartagena, Palmyra, which, to be honest, I haven't even heard of before. He's pronouncing the name of all the cities wrong. Listen, these are smaller cities. But Bogota, where I'm at, is not in the top 50. And so you're seeing some of the capital cities, the larger cities, not being on the list. Basically, if you're willing to not live in the US, Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, or South Africa, you're in good shape. Now, keep in mind, there's some of these countries that might have a residence program, or you might have the ability to live there with some second passports. Having a residence in a country, we've talked about Mexican residents, we've talked about Colombian residents, we've talked a little bit about Brazilian residents and Central American residences. Just because you have a residence permit doesn't mean you have to live there. A residence permit may be a way that you just hold the residence permit, you go for 1 day a year, you work towards getting a second passport, you've got a residence permit in your back pocket, whatever. There's so many different strategies. Just because I say, hey, consider Mexican residents, I'm not saying move lock, stock, and barrel down to Mexico. So what does this mean? From the perspective of homicide rates, obviously the worst of violent crime, if you go to anywhere else, you're going to be safer. And statistically, you're going to be safer than you would in the United States. When it comes to violent crime overall, they're barely in the lower third. And so what you see is the safest regions, on the flip side of this, are much of Asia. Obviously, Japan is not as immigration or tax friendly, but South Korea and Singapore, even Malaysia is not quite as good, but it's still better than a lot of Western countries. A lot of the Asian countries are safer. The Gulf, obviously, one of the safest places in the world. Eastern Europe, one of the safest places in the world. Western Europe does win all the awards, but crime is rising there. I saw some study the other day that San Francisco somehow is safer than some of the emerging places we talk about. It's obscene. And so, especially violent crimes are going up in Europe, which brings me to what we've talked about before, the latest rape statistics from within Europe. What are the highest countries for that? The UK and Sweden, they take the cake. Iceland comes in not far behind. You have France, that's pretty prominent. Denmark is relatively prominent. And then you have the rest. And by the time you trickle down to Slovakia and North Macedonia and tax-friendly for foreigners, Greece, and then even further down to Serbia and Montenegro, the rates get pretty low. Serbia and Montenegro, that's about as low as it goes. So it's interesting that as you move south and east within Europe, violent crime in terms of rape goes down. The countries that you pay a lot of taxes and that the politicians are oh so imperious, we're the best, we're so great, we're Sweden, you should want to pay, you should want to be proud, they're not taking care of you. That, to me, is where the world has dramatically turned. Let's not confuse this with hating the West. Nobody here hates the West. What we're saying is you're getting a bad deal. You're paying a lot of money in taxes. But you know what? Hey, if the taxes made sure you stayed alive and that you weren't a victim of violent crime, you'd be just a little bit more willing to pay them. Until you realized that some of the countries with the lowest taxes were actually some of the safest. Let's go back to that. Asia, the Gulf, and Eastern Europe either have very low tax rates or, for people like business owners, allow you to take advantage of more flexible tax laws that net give you a lower tax rate. So what we're seeing is this great disconnecting of paying the government to keep you safe, paying the government for rule of law, paying the government for all the things that Western legacy brand countries have said they will give you if you only pay them 40 or 50 cents on your dollar, your euro, your pound that you earn. If you only work for them for free into May, June, or July, don't worry, they'll keep you safe. They'll make sure you have well-regulated courts and the roads are good, and none of that's been true. We're here talking about the murder and rape rates in places where you may live. And the statistics in Western countries just aren't great. There are some exceptions. I mean, Canada, for all of its problems, does have lower rates of crime. Some Western European countries are better than others. But in general, why would you pay more? Especially as a business owner, when people in many Western countries are having a harder time because there's not as many opportunities, and they're going to turn against you, and they're going to want you to pay more money for even fewer services and less protection. Why would you want to stay there when there are places in Asia, places in the Middle East, and places in Eastern Europe when you could move, and they'd be happy to have you? They'd love to have you. We talk about Malaysia a lot here. I have never heard anybody tell me there's been a single nasty comment from a Malaysian, ever. Ever, for all the times we've talked about them. Not a single time, don't come here, gringos. Not a single time, we don't want you. Not once that I've ever heard of. Why wouldn't you want to go to a country where not only you can pay an extremely low rate of tax, you can diversify your wealth around the world, you can be safer than where you are, maybe where you are now, you can cut your costs of living dramatically, you can eat better food, you can have better weather, and you can be surrounded by people who are happy you're there. Unlike perhaps what happens if you live in a country like the United States, where 7 out of the top 50 murder capitals are. Go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply if you'd like us to help you with this. I've traveled all over the world. I live all over the world. I don't go to the United States. I feel just as safe and certainly a lot less stressed than I did living in the United States. I think you can achieve that too. The world's most dangerous cities are limited to a very small number of countries. If you want to live in those countries, you can find a way to make it work, as you already are perhaps in the US. I'm guessing if you're watching this, you're not dead. But why not get all the benefits that comes from avoiding what I think is going to be a more dangerous part of the world? And again, Western governments' own police reports are starting to agree with me. There's going to be more chaos. People are going to be more angry. It's going to get nastier. Why not go to the place where it's already not nasty?